Hello, and welcome to Honor Talk. This is the podcast where we explore the legacy left behind in the wake of organ, eye, and tissue donation. I'm your host, Bobby Gomez. Just a quick note, the views and the stories that are shared here are my own. They do not represent any specific organ procurement organization. Thanks for pressing play today. Now let's get started. Welcome to the very first episode of Honor Talk. I'm so glad that you decided to join me. This podcast was created with one purpose: to shine a light on the stories, the struggles, and the triumphs surrounding organ donation and transplantation. Behind every transplant, there's not just a surgery, there's a human story. There's a family holding on to hope. There's another family navigating grief, but choosing generosity. There are doctors, nurses, and coordinators, and advocates working tirelessly to connect the two. And most importantly, there are lives that are forever changed. For me, this is also deeply personal. I'm an organ donation specialist, and for over 10 years, I've had the honor of walking alongside donors and their families during some of the hardest and most meaningful moments of their lives. I've witnessed firsthand the courage it takes for a family to say yes to donation, and I've seen the joy and the relief when a recipient gets that life-saving call that the gift has finally arrived. Those experiences are why I started Honor Talk, to share these incredible stories, to honor the legacies behind them, and to provide education for both the public and healthcare professionals who play such a vital role in this process. In Honor Talk, we'll explore these stories together. Some episodes will bring you personal accounts from recipients who've been given the gift of just one more time to graduate, time to walk their daughters down the aisle, or maybe just to see another sunrise. Other episodes will honor donor families who, in the middle of heartbreak, chose to create life out of loss. We'll also hear from transplant professionals who will pull back the curtain and explain how this incredible process really works, offering not only understanding for the general public, but also valuable insights for healthcare workers seeking to better serve patients and families. And of course, we're going to take some time to clear up some common myths and misconceptions that often hold people back from registering as organ donors. But most of all, this is a space for connection, a place where we can honor the stories of those who gave, those who received, and those still waiting. Here's a sobering truth. Right now, more than 100,000 people in the United States are waiting for a life-saving organ transplant. Every day, about 17 of them will die waiting. That's 17 families who don't get the miracle they were hoping for. And yet, just one donor can save up to 8 lives and help dozens more through tissue and cornea transplantation. When I think about that, it reminds me that this conversation isn't just about numbers. It's about choices. It's about conversations at the dinner table with your loved ones. It's about deciding that your legacy could be measured not only by the life that you lived, but also the lives that you touched after you were gone. So in this very first episode, I want to invite you into this journey with me. Together, we're going to listen, we're going to learn, and we're going to reflect. We're going to grieve with the families, we're going to celebrate with the survivors, and we're going to stand with those who are still waiting. And hopefully, just hopefully, we'll all walk away inspired to take action, whether that's registering to be an organ donor, having an honest conversation with your family, or finding new ways to support patients and families if you work in healthcare. Before we go any further, there's a couple of things that I definitely want to clear up. In the world of the organ procurement organizations, there is tons and tons of acronyms. So use this episode as your guide. There's going to be a lot of things said, and there's going to be a lot of confusion as to what is it exactly that we're talking about. I'm going to apologize well in advance. So OPO, let's start there. Organ Procurement Organization. What are these? These are the entities that are tasked with making sure that organ donation happens in these communities. There are 56 OPOs in the country currently, and that's as of October of 2025. Now, there won't be any more. It's not like somebody can just open an organ procurement organization, but there can be less. Sometimes there's mergers. With that being said, these OPOs, some you'll have one per state. Sometimes you're going to have multiple in a state. I'm in the state of California. There's 4 OPOs here in the state of California. Now, there are definitely states out there where there's only one. There's also lots of positions within every OPO. Every OPO is going to call them something different. There are what they call the clinicians. Some people call them CPCs. Some of them call them ORCs, organ recovery coordinators, clinical procurement coordinators. These are the clinicians that go on site. These are the ones that are actually at the bedside, managing or taking care of the organ donors themselves. So this is from a clinical aspect. So these are kind of like nurses, if you will. Then there's the family side of it. Now, in the family side of it, these are designated requesters. They have lots of acronyms as well. FRCs, FCCs, so that's family care coordinators, family resource coordinators. They all have different acronyms. This person's job is basically to be a resource for the family, meet them where they're at, see exactly how they're feeling, how they're doing, facilitate any of their needs, making sure that they are getting all the information that they need to make a educated decision for organ donation. In some instances, these people are registered donors. In that instance, if they're a registered donor, this is not necessarily a request for donation. It's more of a notification to tell the family that they're going to become an organ donor. This only happens at the end of life. We'll get to that here in a second. There's also another position out there, which is basically like a hospital liaison. They're the ones that foster and kind of make sure that our relationships between these organ procurement organizations, the OPOs, and these hospitals, we maintain a good relationship between the two of us, and we kind of making sure that everything moves smoothly so that the process can happen expeditiously for the family, so that nothing happens in the way of taking too much time, and they can move on with their funeral arrangements and such. So these are people that kind of basically make sure that the relationship stays solid between the hospital and the OPOs. Now, there's a number of other positions within the organ procurement organization. Now, these OPOs, they're all overseen by Centers for Medicare. So this is CMS. So they're CMS regulated. So CMS is the one that sets the standards for exactly what an OPO is responsible for. Basically, any hospital that's out there with the designation of a hospital has to make sure that they have a contract or that they maintain a contract with an OPO. Every hospital has to maintain a contract with an organ procurement organization. Because hospitals do it so infrequently, or at least they would do it so infrequently, they have to have one of the OPOs that actually comes around and makes sure that it actually happens the way it's supposed to happen. There's too many things that could possibly go wrong with the donor that it has to be done perfectly. We can't task a hospital and tie down a hospital for the 1 time, 2 times, or maybe 5 times a year that they'll ever do it. So that's kind of, in a nutshell, the clinical side of this thing. This is where the caregiver that's at the bedside from the OPO, their job is basically to manage and maintain the donor. Now, at this point of the patient's care, whether they're brain dead or they're going to be a donation after cardiac death or DCD, and I'll talk about that here in a second, that person has to make sure that they are managing, taking care of, or at least helping the hospital manage the care of this person. The 2 types of ways that you can be an organ donor. So it's very strange, I'm sure, to most people that you have to pass away in a certain way to even be an organ donor. So only 1%, I'll say that again, only 1% of the individuals that pass away in a hospital even have the ability to be an organ donor. So that's kind of a staggering number. So if 100 people die in a hospital a year, only one of those people will actually be eligible, likely, to be an organ donor. Now, it's a rarity that somebody has the opportunity to even be an organ donor in the hospital. Now, this has changed drastically over the past 2 to 3 years. Invention of different machines for perfusion and things like that, this has kind of changed the role as to like who has the capacity or the ability to be an organ donor. So let's talk about the 2 pathways for donation. The one pathway for donation that is most common and most people see in movies or media is brain dead donation. Sometimes it's referred to as BD or BDD, so brain dead donor or brain dead. So these individuals are ones that came in with some type of a neurological catastrophic injury, whether it been from their heart stopping or whatever the case may be. But these individuals, depending on their state, have been seen by either 2 physicians, like in California, or 1 physician if they're in Nevada. And these people have actually been seen and declared. So 2 physicians or 1 physician has had the opportunity to evaluate all of their neurological standings to see if any of those things are absent. They're put through other studies, some of them being nuclear medicine studies, and through those things, they will declare whether this person is alive or dead. There is a little bit of controversy as to brain death, and I've heard people say, oh, well, I had a family or a friend or whoever it was that was declared brain dead, and then they came back. I've never heard in the decade that I've done this, anybody who's been declared brain dead definitively and then found not to be brain dead. So what has typically happened, or what I've seen happen, is that a doctor or somebody, or maybe even a nurse, says they appear brain dead, or maybe some of the studies were done and they thought this person was brain dead, and it was mentioned that your loved one is likely brain dead, and then there's some improvement or there's some neurological function there. And then the family will grasp to that, or the friends will grasp to that and say, well, you said they were brain dead, but look, they're moving and they're doing such and such. So those are really difficult because in those instances, and I've seen this over, and I've even seen this in my own personal life, they're trying to hold on to something. They're trying to hold on to hope, which you can't fault anybody for trying to hold on to hope. I've never seen anybody that has been definitively declared brain dead, and then a day or 2 days or 3 days later, it comes back and they find out, oh, well, they were declared and now they're alive. So it's an unfortunate thing, but unfortunately, the brain doesn't regenerate that way. The other pathway for donation is donation after cardiac death, DCD, sometimes referred to as donation after circulatory death. And this pathway for donation, what happens is the family has been given a grave prognosis. They've decided that the patient is in a current standing that they would not want to be in. So the patient is basically in a persistent vegetative state, or they're going to be in a position where they would never want to live like that. And the family makes the compassionate decision to go ahead and withdraw life support. So if the family decides at that point to withdraw life support, this is where the OPO would kind of come in, and that's where they would offer the option for donation. In this instance for donation, this person is still technically alive. Well, I guess in the other one, their heart is still beating as well. That's another point, is that in order for donation to happen, the heart must still continue beating. They have to remain on a ventilator. The moment that the ventilator is removed and the patient is no longer breathing, like anything else, it begins to die. So the heart will start to die, the lungs start to die, all the organs start to die. If they're not oxygenated, the blood's not pumping, things aren't moving around, then donation's off the table. A lot of people think, oh, well, if they got into a car accident and something happens to them and they're on the side of the freeway, just rush them to the hospital. That doesn't happen. Maybe in the movies, but not in real life. In order for donation to happen, the patient's heart must be beating. The patient has to be on a ventilator. Absent those things, donation for organ donation, at least, is not going to happen. So with that, donation after cardiac death or donation after circulatory death, DCD. In this instance, like I said, the patient would have to be, everything has to be worked up. So we have to find recipients, we have to schedule the ORs, we have to get with the family, make sure that the timing is going to work for them as well. And then we can move to the operating room. And from there, they allow for natural death to occur. They allow the hospital and the families to have their moment and withdraw life support in a dignified manner, absent any OPO input, and they're allowed to pass away comfortably in a hospital bed. Now, there's time parameters in which this has to happen, and they're not set by us. They're not set even by the hospital. They're set by the human body itself. So after a certain period with the patient passing away, if the patient doesn't pass in a certain amount of time, unfortunately, the organs will have sustained too much shortage of oxygen and they are no longer usable in a recipient. So if they do pass away in a set time frame, we have the opportunity to move to an operating room and recover the organs in an operating room and move forward with the transplantation of those organs. But absent that, unfortunately, donation would again be off the table. So those are the two pathways for donation. There's DCD, donation after cardiac death, or donation after circulatory death. And then there's brain dead donation, BD or BDD donation. Now, the other thing that is worth mentioning is when the hospital is managing these donors, they're doing it with little input from us, the OPO. They don't look to us for guidance. They don't look to us. We give them the set minimum standard that is needed for transplantation, the safe transplantation of these organs. And we work within those guidelines to make sure that happens. Next thing I'd like to talk about is the registry itself. There's a lot of things in the media. There's a lot of things that are kind of in the public eye when it comes to organ donation and being a registered organ donor. And there's a lot of myths and misconceptions. So in my time as being a paramedic, I never once looked at a driver's license to see if somebody was an organ donor. It really didn't dawn on me to look at something like that because I really didn't know how that worked. And in talking with most of my colleagues that came off the ambulance or that are still on the ambulance, it's not a product of what we're taught. It's not a product of what we do. The person that we're worried most about is the person in front of us. We really don't have any thought as to the person after the one in front of us. So to think that somebody on an ambulance or even an emergency room physician looks at a driver's license and then somehow derives how they're going to care for you based on the pink dot or based on the dot on your state, that's not something that's ever done. I've never heard of anything like this where they figure it out, oh, well, we're just not going to treat them because they're going to be an organ donor. Most of the time, the referrals that we're getting or the referrals that OPOs are getting, they're not even coming from the emergency department. They're coming from the ICUs. These hospitals are bound to report a patient population who is either not expected to survive the hospitalization or maybe just suffered some type of a catastrophic injury. So if they meet these parameters, the hospital has to report them to an organ procurement organization. Because donation takes so long, the viewing to see if the person even has the capability of being an organ donor starts pretty early on. So there's a chance that you know somebody who's come into a hospital under some catastrophic injury, and I hope that they're by your side, or maybe it's you listening to this podcast, that you came into a hospital and you had some kind of a motorcycle accident or some type of catastrophic injury, and you're alive and you're well today. That doesn't mean that they didn't refer. That does not mean that if they felt that there's a chance, even a small chance, that you could not make it, then they would refer. So they would tell us, hey, we have so-and-so John Doe who's come in, and these are the parameters in which they came in. Not everybody is eligible to be an organ donor. Sometimes there's age criteria, even though that's highly expanded now. Sometimes there's infectious processes that prevent somebody from being an organ donor. And sometimes there's unknowns. Sometimes there's things where it's more of a risk because of maybe lifestyle or behavior and the unknowns. Most of the time, we try our best to get as much of the information as we possibly can to allow the transplant centers to make an educated decision for their recipients. But ultimately, it is on the transplant surgeon to see if what the organ that's being offered is going to be the best fit for their recipient. Again, my hope for this podcast is really, it has two pillars to it. One of them is telling the stories of the organ donors, the heroes and their families, and kind of that healing process and that aspect of what it looks like for them, both at the time of, and then what it looks like moving forward and through to today. Like, what does that look like for them? The other pillar that really I want to stand on is education, both for healthcare professionals as well as the public in general. There's a lot of misnomers. There's a lot of ideas about what donation looks like. I hope that you subscribe to this podcast in hopes of seeing what donation is truly about and maybe how you can better manage or treat a family who's in that donation process. Many families I found find peace and meaning through the donation process. So I've had tons of families that have come to me with their healing stories about what donation has meant for them or their families or their healing process. They've never met a family who's come back to me and said, I wish I would not have donated. My hope is really to educate, honor, and humanize this process of organ donation. Thank you for pressing play today. Thank you for being open to hearing these stories. And thank you for joining me in honoring the legacies of those who gave and celebrating the lives of those who have received. This is Honor Talk. Let's start the conversation.